with this session, like what I want to talk a little bit about is just how do you continue to grow in this area? So I don't know, maybe you really enjoyed this class, maybe you really hated this class, maybe like after this class, you're like, I'm never touching this stuff again. It was clearly like too intensive of a labor process and I prefer to just make my art my own way. Maybe you really love this class and you're like, I want to figure out how to turn this into a career. I have no solution for you there. I would love to hear if you can turn this into a career. But maybe you just want to learn more about machine learning, or maybe you want to learn more about machine learning art and different techniques and other people. I've sort of taught like a pretty narrow subset of machine learning art, really around image and video generation and like very generative work. There are lots of other people who are working in other categories. So I'm going to sort of show you some different other resources that you're welcome to like sort of test out and play with. I recorded a video last night or the night before about how to take a new model and how to bring it into Colab to play with. So let's say like 6 months from now, someone's like, hey, have you heard about this amazing new machine learning model? And like, let's say like I'm on vacation for a couple weeks and you just really want to dig in and play with it. This video will show you how to like start to read through a GitHub repo, how to understand what the process is, and then how to move it into Colab so you can begin to test and play with it. I'll talk a little bit about what the steps are here. The videos like goes way deeper into this stuff, but usually what I do is, so how do I find a new model? There's a ton of different ways to find new models. There's like R Machine Learning on Reddit. There's a thing called Archive Daily, which tweets out every new machine learning paper that gets written. But I would generally recommend like look at Runway. Like Runway has a ton of new models. And there's a guy on there, his name is Sri. He's constantly like uploading new models to Runway. It's a good place to just start playing with things and understand the inputs, outputs, and play with stuff. When you do find a paper or when you do find a model you're interested in playing with, I highly recommend your first step being to read the paper or read through the entire GitHub README. In part because I don't expect you to understand, hell, I don't understand 50% of what I read in most papers, but it gives me a sense of the idea that they're trying to achieve and how they might have gone about doing it. And that's helpful for me to understand inputs, outputs, and how things work. Reading the GitHub repo, like my number one recommendation is if you go to their GitHub repo and there is like one paragraph of how it works and no instructions, you should abandon that model immediately because they clearly don't care about it. If someone has gone in and actually documented, here's how you run testing, here's how you run training, here are the things you need to pre-install alongside it, that means they've taken enough steps to help you get through the model. And that just means in general, it's going to be way easier to work with. So those are like two leading indicators for me of if I can even try something. Once I've understood that, I think it's, you'll get a sort of a comfort to converting GitHub README code into Colab. It's usually something like run a git clone, CD into that folder, find the pre-trained models you need to find, like download those using GDown. I'll also explain in this video that I posted, but it's basically like you kind of want to convert the code that they have in GitHub as like basic steps into Colab. And the reason that I recommend Colab is like it's free, so like it doesn't cost you anything. Google has installed most of the major libraries you need. So like you won't have to worry about trying to install stuff on a Paperspace server. And also it's pretty immediate, right? You don't need to like load up a machine, try to figure out how to upload stuff, like that sort of thing. Also run their pre-trained models. Like, so I know everyone wants to immediately jump into the fun artwork stuff, but one way to understand how the thing works is to run the pre-trained code. There usually be like code samples of like run test.py, and you'll see that it goes through these images and converts it to something else. So go through those steps. It's a little bit more of a learning process, but you'll get there and you'll sort of understand the model a little bit better. The next thing I do is if they do allow training, or if there are training steps, I recommend running a short training session on Colab. So again, run it for an hour or two, see what errors you get or don't get, just to get a sense of what you should expect if you do want to move it over to Paperspace. And then lastly, you can run a full training on Paperspace. Usually, as I'll show in the video, in the demo video, once you move stuff to Colab, you basically have the instructions you need. And I also recommend like using Colab to like make notes about like, I got an error here doing this thing, and then use that when you upload it to Paperspace, right? So if you got an install error, but you figure out how to fix it, keep track of those notes because that's going to help you when you need to move it over to another model or to Paperspace on another server. So this is the process. That video will sort of walk you through it. But, you know, in general, like the other thing I would say is give yourself some time to do this work. Even I sometimes am like, I bet I can get this done in 20 minutes. And I like start into it and it's like total hell. And I'm really frustrated that I like, oh, I have to run to a class or I have to run to work and I like don't have time to actually finish this. Give yourself a good hour or two to really like dig into something, because you will hit walls and you will get frustrated. And if you have a little bit more time to explore, you'll be able to like, it'll kind of help your sanity a little bit. Any questions? I don't know that I expect anyone to have questions since everyone watched the demo. Questions are always welcome in Slacks or, you know, messaging me. So I also want to talk a little bit about like some other places to learn a little bit of learn either different techniques or other things. So if you're particularly interested in machine learning art, I highly recommend these 3 resources. So Runway has started producing videos. There are particularly videos about how to use Runway, but Gene Kogan, who I'll talk about in a second, is also like, he creates the videos for Runway. And he also does a really great job of explaining what the process is or what the idea is behind each model before running it. So he's got some videos on StyleGAN and generative networks, and then he shows you how to do your own training in Runway on StyleGAN. So it's worthwhile to look at those, especially if you're interested in just sort of high level stuff. Or if you found that Runway is way easier for you to understand than SSHing into boxes and writing commands and that sort of thing. I'm fully on board with Runway. Like if you love Runway and you find it really helpful or useful, feel free to use it. The next library, I think, or the next resource I think you should look at is ML for Art. This is Machine Learning for Art. This is Gene Kogan's class and repository. I'm actually just going to pull it up because I think there's a ton of stuff here worth looking at. Gene has like a ton of resources in here of classes he's taught in the past, demos of things that he works on, code. He has a Slack channel that has sadly gotten about as quiet as my Slack channel is, but it's still worth checking out. But he's got a class here from about a year, but a little over a year old now. But there's, I think like something like 12 lectures or something in here. Just a lot of resources. It's definitely worthwhile to watch this. Whereas I teach a very narrow set of like image and video creation, Gene goes a little bit further into like doing different types of work. There's a lot of stuff here about different classes. So a lot of different things. It's worth checking out if you want to go deep into some stuff. I highly recommend looking at his work. And he does have a bunch of other things. I know he's working on a book as well. So I think he posts some updates to his book through here as well. So it's worth checking out for sure. The last thing to talk about is Coding Train. If you're not familiar with Dan Schiffman's work, Dan Schiffman is, actually I think both Gene and Dan work at ITP, NYU. Dan teaches sort of just coding classes as a whole. And he has a YouTube series called Coding Train. He teaches processing, he teaches P5, and he has a couple series devoted just to machine learning. And he's also started teaching more Runway materials as well. So if you go to Coding Train on YouTube, also Dan's just a very fun guy. He has a very fun spirit in showing his videos. He sings, he dances, he plays weird machines and makes lots of noises. This is his series on neural networks and machine learning, which I think would be pretty helpful if you're interested in sort of understanding a little bit of the background of things. And then I know I can never find the right playlist for him because he produces a ton of materials. Like I think he does a video a week and they're pretty long. But there's a ton of different stuff in here on using Runway, neural network pixel input. So he also manages a thing called ML5.js, which is being able to do JavaScript in a browser for machine learning. That's a little trickier than the work that we do, which is like, you can't really train stuff in JavaScript on the browser because it's not high enough like GPU or memory, but you can do some other things. So he does some stuff here around pose stuff, which I don't really teach, but if you're interested in like animating stuff through dance or other like pose motion, there's some really good videos here. So I would definitely recommend checking out his work. And there's just like, you could probably watch videos for a full year in his YouTube video. There's an amazing amount of resources there. So that covers sort of what I know to be like the best places for artistic-based ML resources. If you're interested particularly in just machine learning as a theory or non-artwork applications of machine learning, there's a lot more materials there. The one thing I would sort of caution you against is that they can get in the weeds and get really mathy really quickly. So I'm personally not into that as much, but there are still some good resources that I recommend reading or looking at. My favorite is fast.ai. That is a class, I'm blanking on the two folks' names who teach it, but every year they teach a new course, and every year they update their videos, and it's sort of 2 or 3 hour lectures. It's like this class actually. It's exhibits like 10 or 12 weeks. And the guy who runs it is great. I sort of model a lot of how I teach this class and how he teaches it, which is very interactive. He walks you through things. He explains stuff. I think he's one of the best people at explaining how machine learning works, and how also like he doesn't get deep into like theory and math. He's more about how you produce stuff. So it's a pretty good learning series. I will tell you that I've had to watch it 2 or 3 times just to like sort of catch up with all the materials he has. So it's pretty deep. The next one is, I think you linked to this class previously. MIT has a deep learning class. It is like their intro to deep learning. And they record all the lectures and post them online. And this is a good like sort of high level overview of machine learning. It's not very math heavy. It also doesn't tell you how to produce stuff. But if you just want general ideas of how things work, this is a really good series. Again, it's like 10 to 12 videos every year. And it generally doubles, like every year is about the same, I would say. But they also invite lots of guests who will come and talk about the models they work on, how they work, like those sort of things. One of the more popular like ML classes on the internet is Andrew Ng's Coursera class. I think it's like the most popular ML class in the world. Andrew teaches at Stanford. Stanford is like one of the big, it's like Stanford and MIT are the big schools for machine learning right now. His class is pretty good. It's still pretty math and theory heavy. Like I would say this is the most math and theory heavy one of them all. But if you are interested, it's a good class. It's a lot of homework and a lot of assignments. So if you really want to dig in, that's good. But it's worth doing. The last one is a book that I recommend. People often ask me like, what books do I recommend to get into machine learning? And this is my favorite by far. It's by a guy by the name of Francois Chalot. Francois now works at Google, but he was previously the inventor of Keras. And Keras was like a machine learning library that made it a little bit easier to write machine learning code and could work with TensorFlow and PyTorch, which you might not know about, but those are the 2 big machine learning languages. What I love about this book is Francois, one, like does not really care about math. He's not really a math person, but he's very good at explaining all of the ideas behind everything. So this will teach you how to do discrimination networks, so like how to do classes. It will also then get into some of the work that we've been doing and explaining how it works from the more theoretical machine learning side. But I really like his approach to how he works through projects. I find that a lot of other books will just sort of throw you into the deep end or just throw you code and not explain stuff well. And this is a good mix of those two. Did someone had a question? Ian, do you just want to shout this out loud?
Oh, I was just saying, a friend of mine has a copy of the Deep Learning with Python, and in the first couple of chapters, I had multiple moments where I was like, oh, okay, now I finally understand this. Like, he's just really good at explaining things.
Yeah, he is like, if you're going to follow like general machine learning people, he's one of my favorite people to follow because he is really clear and he's very good at explaining things. And I'm sure like we've all experienced this, but like there are people who are experts at a certain thing, but couldn't explain it to like a normal human. But then there are people who are experts and can explain it at a level that we all understand. And Francois is one of those people. So like highly, highly recommend that book if you want to learn more about machine learning and about maybe writing some code. If you are like a coder, his book will definitely be the best way for you to get into that work and to understand it. Like I sort of come from like a web background. So Python has been like a learning curve for me to really get into it. But I do learn a lot from his materials. So I've got one more thing to talk about, which is this being the last class. Some of you will not want to do any more work after this, or you're going to finish your project and then be like, cool, I'm done. I'm never touching this again. So what I want to walk you through is just how do you destroy your Paperspace machine? So I'm just going to log into Paperspace over here. The thing to remember about Paperspace is that if your machine isn't running, you're not being charged hourly. But if you still have a machine, you're going to be charged, of course, 1 second. I can't talk and do this at the same time. There we go. Okay. But if you have a machine and you own it, it's charging you a monthly fee for that storage space, essentially. It's essentially charging you for however many gigabytes you're using, or however many gigabytes you ask to use. So if your machine is off, but you are no longer using it, you want to destroy it. And by destroying it, I mean that is like going to completely remove your machine from your list, and it is going to no longer charge you at all for your materials. So basically, like, you're going to lose all the work that's on that server if you haven't saved it, but it will also you won't be charged anymore after this. So the way you destroy a machine is you log into you come into your machine in Paperspace, and you're going to see here at the bottom, it says deactivate. If you click that button, that's going to destroy your machine. I don't want to click it because I'm not sure if there's a modal between here. I think there's a modal between here, but just in case, I'm not going to destroy this. But if you click this button, once it removes your machine, you will no longer be charged at all for it. So you'll be charged an hourly rate. I'm not sure how they do the monthly billing of your storage space. I want to say it's prorated, but it might just be like on the first of the month they charge you and that's it. So, but basically your next billing cycle, you shouldn't see any additional costs from this. So I do think it's important that, like, if you haven't used all your credits, but you did give it a credit card, at some point in the next couple weeks, like, if you're not using it, come in here and destroy it, because you will start racking up fees over time. Like, I had one student who I think went maybe 3 or 4 months and then, like, reached out to me and was like, I'm still being charged by Paperspace, but I'm not using it. And I was like, oh, but if you still have your machine up, they're still charging you. So it's important to remember that you want to destroy this. So that's a step to destroying it. If you ever have questions about this stuff, like, please feel free to just Slack me or message me, and I'll happily walk you through the step again. But it is important to know that if you're done with your machine and you know you're not going to use it again, to come in here and destroy it. And also, I'd say, if you know that you're not using your machine for like a couple months, but you know you want to come back to it eventually, still destroy it and then come back and watch these videos where I showed you how to install stuff. You can go through the steps again and reinstall it. It's still gonna be better than being charged $10 a month for your storage. And of course, like, it's always available to you again. So with that said, now I want to talk a little bit about what your homework is. So your homework for this week are a couple things. So first off, I'll actually go from backwards. So style transfer and X-Stream prediction, like, have at it, make a video, like, make style transfer images. Try to play around with it. I think I saw so much wonderful work this week in StyleGAN that I would love to see. Even though I saw half that work this coming week, it would be great to see this. So give it a shot, play with stuff, post it in Slack. I didn't link to the style transfer demo, which I will update this deck and do. It is linked up earlier in the next stream prediction as well. I think it's interesting to explore how to change different arguments in style transfer and see what happens there. And if you have a lot of time and you're willing to burn through a lot of money, training different types of motion on next stream prediction would be a really, really interesting test.